The night was still, the only sound the steady ticking of the clock above Jasmine's bed. She lay wide awake, her body tangled in the soft, faded sheets of her room, eyes staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. The weight of the past few weeks had been unbearable. The secret she had been hiding so desperately was growing harder to keep, her fear of being discovered consuming her thoughts. It wasn't just a secret, it was a ticking time bomb. She had done everything she could to protect herself, to keep the truth hidden. But now it felt like there was nowhere left to run. Jasmine's mother, Deborah, had been distant lately, no longer the warm, protective figure she used to be. The subtle shift had started weeks ago, when Jasmine's morning sickness had become impossible to ignore. Her mother had noticed, but Jasmine had made excuses, tired, stressed, just not feeling well. But Deborah's eyes had lingered, searching for answers. Jasmine could feel her mother's suspicion growing. It was only a matter of time before the truth came out. Jasmine had never felt more alone. Not just because of the pregnancy, but because of the heavy, unspoken distance that had grown between her and her mother. Deborah wasn't the type of person to have deep conversations about feelings or emotions. She was practical, always focused on doing what was necessary to survive. That's what Jasmine had always admired about her mother. But now, Jasmine could feel her eyes on her in a way that made her skin crawl. Her mother was onto her. The knock at the door shattered the stillness. It wasn't the kind of knock that carried the warmth of comfort, but the kind that made her pulse quicken and her stomach twist with dread. Jasmine, her mother's voice broke through the silence. It wasn't the comforting tone she was used to. There was an edge to it, one that made Jasmine's chest tighten. Jasmine sat up quickly, her breath catching in her throat. She wiped her damp palms on her jeans, trying to still the shaking that had suddenly overtaken her. She knew what this was. This was the moment that had been looming on the horizon like a storm cloud, threatening to break over her head. Jasmine, her mother's voice was louder now, more insistent. Open the door. Jasmine stood, her legs feeling like jelly beneath her. She crossed the room slowly, each step heavier than the last. When she opened the door, she found her mother standing in the hallway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Deborah's expression was unreadable, but there was something dark in her eyes, something that Jasmine couldn't identify but knew all too well. It was a mixture of anger and hurt. You need to tell me what's going on, Deborah said, her voice low but firm. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She knew what was coming, but the words still felt like they were choking her. She had been holding this secret for so long, trying to protect herself from the inevitable confrontation. But now there was no avoiding it. Her mother had found out, and Jasmine had no idea how to explain herself. I don't know what you mean, Jasmine stammered, her voice cracking. Deborah narrowed her eyes. Don't lie to me, Jasmine. I know what's going on. I'm not blind. You've been acting different for weeks. You're not the same. And I've seen the signs. Your sickness, your mood swings, your changes. She paused, her voice softening for a moment. I need to know the truth. Jasmine's throat felt dry as she opened her mouth, trying to find the words that could explain it all. But there were no words, not ones that could make her mother understand. How could she possibly explain this? How could she admit what had happened, what she had done? It was one thing to be caught, but another entirely to face the consequences of her actions. Jasmine's voice cracked, but she forced herself to keep going. I'm pregnant, Mom. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She closed her eyes, unable to look at her mother's face as a silence stretched between them. Deborah stood still for a moment, her eyes wide in shock. She didn't say anything at first. Jasmine could feel the air between them grow thick, suffused with the weight of the revelation. Then her mother took a step back, her hands shaking as she gripped the doorframe. What did you say? Deborah asked, her voice barely a whisper. I'm pregnant, Jasmine repeated, her heart pounding in her chest. For a long time, Deborah didn't speak. She simply stood there, her eyes locked on Jasmine, as if she couldn't comprehend the words she had just heard. Jasmine could see the shock in her mother's face, the way her lips trembled, her eyes filling with tears that she didn't let fall. How could you? Deborah finally whispered, her voice filled with pain. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening. She wanted to explain, to say that she hadn't planned for this, that it had happened before she even understood what was happening. But the words stuck in her throat. How could she explain? How could she make her mother understand that she was still a child herself, trying to figure out the mess of her life, of her feelings, of her body? "I'm sorry," Jasmine whispered, feeling the guilt wrap around her like a suffocating blanket. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want you to be disappointed in me." Disappointed? Deborah's voice rose, her eyes flashing with anger. "This isn't just about being disappointed, Jasmine. This is about your future. This is about your life. You're not ready for this. You're still a child yourself." "I know," Jasmine whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know I'm not ready, but I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of it." Deborah took a deep breath, her face contorting in an expression Jasmine couldn't decipher. After a long silence, her mother spoke again, her voice cold and distant. "You need to leave. You're not staying here, not like this." Jasmine's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? No, Mom, please." "I can't raise a child who's already a mother," Deborah snapped. "This isn't just your mistake, Jasmine. It's mine too. And I don't know how to deal with it. You need to leave. Pack your things. You can't stay here." Jasmine's heart slammed against her chest. "You're kicking me out?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Mom, please. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I need you. I need my family." Her mother didn't answer at first. She just stood there, her back stiff, her arms still crossed over her chest. Her gaze was hard, and Jasmine could see the anger and fear in her eyes. But there was also something else, something that Jasmine couldn't quite place. Was it regret? Was it pity? "I can't help you, Jasmine," Deborah said softly. "I can't even help myself. You need to go." Jasmine felt her knees weaken as she backed away, as if the ground beneath her feet had suddenly vanished. She wanted to scream, to fight back, to demand that her mother take her in, to make things right. But there was nothing she could say that would change her mother's mind. She was too far gone. "I'm sorry," Deborah said, her voice quieter now but still firm. "But this is your life. You're on your own now." Jasmine's world collapsed. Her mother had just told her that she was no longer welcome in the only home she had ever known. She could feel the tears spilling from her eyes, but she couldn't make them stop. She turned away, her chest tight with sorrow and fear. She didn't know where to go or what to do. The only thing she knew was that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. She grabbed her suitcase and walked out the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her mother didn't say goodbye. The door shut behind her. Jasmine didn't know where to go. The street seemed like a foreign, overwhelming place now. Her legs wobbled beneath her as she walked, dragging her suitcase behind her like a weight tied to her soul. Each step felt like a mile, each breath heavier than the last. The cold air bit at her skin, but it wasn't the chill that made her shiver. It was the sharp, suffocating feeling of abandonment. Her mother's words still echoed in her ears, each one a sharp, painful reminder that she was truly alone. The neighborhood was quieter than usual. The houses, once familiar and comforting, now felt like empty, distant shells. Jasmine had spent her entire life in this neighborhood, but now it seemed unrecognizable. She walked past the corner store, the one her mom always visited for groceries, the one where she used to run in and out, laughing with her friends. There were no familiar faces now, no one to turn to. She tried calling Maya, a friend from school who she had kept in touch with here and there, but after a few rings, the line went to voicemail. "Great," she muttered to herself, running a hand through her messy hair. She tried texting, but nothing came back. No one cared. No one could help her. At this moment, her world felt like a vast and empty space, and all the people she had once counted on were nowhere to be found. She was cast out into the streets, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the baby growing inside her. Her thoughts kept spiraling, drowning her in self-pity and confusion. What had she done to deserve this? She hadn't chosen this life, hadn't chosen to be in this situation. She was just a kid herself. She couldn't be expected to be someone's mother. But here she was, pregnant, rejected, and alone. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes again, but she blinked them away, fighting the urge to break down in front of strangers. She had to be strong. She didn't know how, but she had to. The weight of the suitcase dragged behind her, and she could feel her arms starting to ache from the effort. She didn't know where to go. She could go back to her old school, but that felt impossible. How could she face her classmates? How could she ever go back to a place where she had been just another teenager, living her life, unaware of the chaos that was about to engulf her? Jasmine stopped walking. Her feet were sore, her body exhausted. The street lights flickered dimly in the distance, casting long shadows on the cracked sidewalk. She stood there for a moment, feeling lost and broken. Suddenly, a voice broke through her haze of despair. "Hey, are you okay?" Jasmine turned quickly, startled. A girl stood a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. She was about her age, with messy shoulder-length hair, a faded hoodie and ripped jeans. She didn't look like anyone from Jasmine's school, but there was a certain familiarity in the way she stood, like someone who had seen too much of the world and was just trying to get by. Jasmine hesitated, unsure of what to say. She didn't even know how to answer. She wasn't okay, but could anyone truly understand? The girl's expression softened when she saw Jasmine's hesitation. "You look like you could use some help. Do you need a place to stay?" Jasmine felt a strange sense of hope flicker inside her, like a faint light in the dark. She didn't know who this girl was, but the offer was enough to stir something deep within her, a need, a desire to trust, even if just for a moment. Her heart was racing, not from fear this time, but from the possibility that someone, anyone, could help her. I don't know," Jasmine replied, her voice barely a whisper. I got kicked out. I don't have anywhere to go." The girl studied her for a moment, her dark eyes sharp and observant, as though assessing whether Jasmine was telling the truth or not. After a few moments, the girl nodded and stepped forward. "I'm Maya," she said, extending her hand. "I know what that's like. I've been there. You're not the only one. I've got a place. You can come with me." Jasmine looked at Maya's hand, unsure for a second. But there was something about Maya that made Jasmine believe her. She wasn't offering false comfort or empty promises. There was no judgment in her voice, just a quiet understanding. Taking a deep breath, Jasmine grasped Maya's hand. "Okay, thank you." Maya smiled, leading Jasmine down the street. They didn't speak much at first. Jasmine was too overwhelmed, lost in her thoughts. Maya seemed content to let her be. The night air was cool and thick, and the city around them buzzed with life, but Jasmine felt removed from it all. It was as if the world had kept spinning, but she had been left behind. Maya led her through a series of alleyways and side streets, weaving through the darkness of the city. After what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at an apartment building that looked like it had seen better days. It was old, with peeling paint and a musty smell coming from the hallway, but Jasmine could already feel a small sense of relief building inside her. This was real. She wasn't alone anymore. Inside, the apartment was small, cramped, and cluttered, with mismatched furniture and empty pizza boxes strewn around. The smell of something burning faintly in the oven filled the air, and there was a radio playing softly in the background. The place felt alive in a way Jasmine hadn't experienced in a while. "This is my place," Maya said, setting her keys on a nearby table. "It's not much, but it's home." Jasmine nodded, feeling a slight flutter in her chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. And right now, that something meant the world to her. "Who else lives here?" Jasmine asked, looking around the room. "Just me mostly," Maya said with a shrug. "But there are others who crash here sometimes. People come and go. We all kind of look out for each other. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. You're safe here." Jasmine glanced over at the couch, where a few people were lounging, chatting quietly. They all looked up when Maya entered, their faces curious but kind. Jasmine didn't recognize any of them, but their expressions didn't hold the judgment she had expected. They just seemed like people trying to survive, just like her. "Hey, this is Jasmine," Maya introduced her. "She's staying with us for a while." One of the guys, a tall, lanky boy with shaggy hair, gave her a friendly nod. "Hey, welcome. Hope you're doing okay." "Thanks," Jasmine muttered, a little overwhelmed by the sudden attention. She didn't know what to expect from this group, but something about them made her feel slightly less alone. "Don't mind the mess," another girl said with a laugh, brushing a hand through her long, tangled hair. "It's always like this here. Just make yourself comfortable." Jasmine set her suitcase down by the door and found a spot to sit down. Her body felt sore from the walk, her head aching from the lack of sleep. But for the first time in hours, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was no longer standing on the edge of the unknown, alone in the cold. For now, at least, she had found a temporary refuge. Maya sat beside her, giving her a small smile. "We'll figure this out, Jasmine. You're not alone anymore." Jasmine looked at her and nodded, the lump in her throat growing again. She wanted to believe Maya, wanted to believe that this was the beginning of something better. But somewhere deep inside, she knew that her real journey was just beginning, and the road ahead would be anything but easy. Still, for the first time in a long time, Jasmine let herself relax, even if just a little. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. Jasmine sat on the worn-out couch, staring at the flickering TV screen in front of her, but not really seeing it. The apartment was quieter now, the music having faded into the background as most of the others went to bed. Maya had disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Jasmine alone with her thoughts. The weight of the past few hours seemed to settle on her all at once. She was no longer under her mother's roof, no longer a part of the life she had known. In its place was this unfamiliar place, with unfamiliar people, none of whom she knew how to trust. They were kind to her, but it was hard to shake the feeling that she was still an outsider. She wasn't like them, not yet. She wasn't like anyone. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Before she could answer, the door creaked open, and Maya stepped in, a steaming mug of something in her hand. "Couldn't sleep," Maya said, offering Jasmine the mug. "I figured you might need something warm." Jasmine accepted the mug, nodding her thanks. "I'm okay, really. Just thinking." Maya perched herself on the edge of the couch, glancing at Jasmine with a knowing look. "I get it. Everything's different now, huh?" Jasmine took a sip from the mug, feeling the warmth seep through her chest, but it did little to thaw the cold, sinking feeling in her stomach. "Yeah, it's just hard. I don't know what to do, Maya. I thought I had my life figured out. I thought I knew what I wanted, but now it feels like I'm trapped." Maya leaned back, folding her arms across her chest. "I hear you. You don't have to figure everything out right now, you know. You just have to get through the day. One step at a time." "Right. One step at a time," Jasmine repeated softly, but the words felt hollow. Maya studied her for a moment, then exhaled deeply. "Listen, Jasmine, I get that it's a lot, but I want you to know you're not alone in this. We're all just trying to figure it out. You've got a place here, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need." Jasmine looked over at Maya, her heart aching at the kindness. It was hard to wrap her head around it. People weren't supposed to be this kind, not after what she'd been through, after what her own mother had done to her. "Why are you helping me?" Jasmine asked, her voice quiet. "I don't even know you. You barely know anything about me." Maya smiled softly, leaning forward. "Because I've been where you are. A long time ago, I was in the same place, looking for someone who wouldn't turn me away. And I found a few people who helped me along the way, so I'm just paying it forward. It's what you do when you've been through hell and you make it out alive. You help others." Jasmine nodded slowly, taking it in. There was something genuine in Maya's eyes, something that made her believe she was being told the truth. But still, Jasmine's walls were up. She had to be cautious. She had learned that the hard way. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready," Maya added, noticing the hesitation. "But when you are, I'm here to listen." "I don't know if I can ever be ready," Jasmine whispered, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I just want to go back, to when everything was simple." But there was no going back. The words had already been spoken. The truth was out there now. There was no escaping the reality that she was pregnant, that her life had changed forever, and that her future was completely uncertain. Jasmine rubbed her forehead, trying to push back the tears. She hadn't cried since she left her mother's house, and she wasn't about to start now. But the pressure was building. The dam was threatening to burst, and it was hard to hold it all in. Maya, sensing her struggle, gently placed a hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "It's okay to cry, you know. You don't have to be strong all the time." Jasmine shook her head, her voice catching in her throat. "I don't know how. I don't know how to be strong. I'm not strong enough for this." "You are," Maya said softly. "You just don't realize it yet. But you're going to get through this. You will." Jasmine looked at her eyes searching Maya's face for something she wasn't sure she was even looking for. maybe hope, maybe understanding. It was hard to trust, but in this moment, something inside her told her that Maya wasn't lying. "I don't know what's next for me," Jasmine said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't tell you what's next," Maya replied, "but I can tell you that it's going to be okay. It might not feel like it now, but you'll make it through. And I'll be here. We all will." Jasmine nodded. The small flicker of hope Maya had sparked inside her beginning to grow. She didn't know what the future held, but she had to believe that there was something beyond the pain. Something beyond the fear and uncertainty. For the first time in a long time, Jasmine allowed herself to relax just a little. The next few days passed in a blur. Jasmine spent most of her time inside the apartment, trying to adjust to the new rhythms of life. Maya introduced her to the others who lived there: Ben, the lanky boy she had seen earlier, and Sarah, a girl with piercing green eyes who spoke softly but had a fierce presence. They were all part of an underground community that seemed to take care of each other, finding solace in a world that had abandoned them. Jasmine didn't quite fit in yet, but she was beginning to feel like she might. The pregnancy, though, was always in the back of her mind. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw it, growing, inevitable. She hadn't told anyone here yet. She wasn't sure how to, but it was becoming harder and harder to ignore. Every passing day brought more change to her body, more reminders of the responsibility growing inside her. She needed to figure out what to do. One afternoon, after a long, restless night, Jasmine was sitting by the window when Maya found her again. She had a notebook in hand, and her eyes were filled with quiet determination. "You need to start thinking about your options," Maya said, sitting down beside her. "I know it's scary, but the sooner you start making decisions, the better." Jasmine looked at the notebook in Maya's hands, unsure of what to say. "I don't even know what the options are. I don't even know what I want." "I get it," Maya said, her voice softening. "But you don't have to decide everything right now. Just start small. Think about what feels right for you." Jasmine nodded, the weight of everything pressing in on her chest. "I don't want to fail at this. I don't want to be a bad mom. I'm scared." "You're going to be scared," Maya said, giving her a comforting smile. "But you don't have to do it alone. And you don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep going, one step at a time. We're here to help." Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment, letting Maya's words settle over her. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. A way out of the fear and hopelessness she felt. But she couldn't do it alone. Not anymore. Days turned into weeks, and though Jasmine's life in the apartment had begun to feel like some sort of strange new normal, the anxiety in her chest never quite left. Every time she woke up in the morning, she felt the weight of her reality pressing down on her like a 1,000-pound stone. Her body was changing, growing, and each time she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, her stomach felt like a reminder that she wasn't the same girl who had left her mother's house. Maya, Sarah, and Ben did their best to keep her company, pulling her into their world with easy laughter and late-night talks. But there were moments, too many moments, when Jasmine would find herself alone in her room, staring at the wall or pacing the small apartment, overwhelmed by the enormity of what she was facing. She had been trying to figure out what to do, but every decision felt like a trap. Her thoughts spun in endless circles, always returning to the same haunting questions. How could she possibly raise a child? Was she even capable of being a mother? Was she ready to face the truth of her situation? It wasn't just the pregnancy that haunted her. It was the fear of being judged, of failing. The whispers in the back of her mind grew louder with each passing day. What if she couldn't do it? What if she wasn't strong enough? One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the apartment, Jasmine found herself sitting on the couch, absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her mug. Maya sat next to her, flipping through a magazine. "You know, I think you should talk to a doctor," Maya said, breaking the silence. "It's important to get checked, see how things are going with the pregnancy. You've been quiet about it, and I get that, but you can't ignore it forever." Jasmine clenched the mug a little tighter, feeling her throat tighten. "I know. I just don't know how to even start." Her voice cracked, revealing just how much the weight of her thoughts was suffocating her. Maya paused, looking over at her with a soft expression. "It's okay to be scared, Jasmine. But not talking about it or pretending it's not happening doesn't make it go away. You need to take care of yourself, and that little one inside you." Jasmine nodded, trying to hold back the flood of emotion that was threatening to break through. She'd been so focused on surviving, on getting through each day, that she hadn't allowed herself to truly think about what was coming. What would she do? What could she do? You don't have to make any big decisions right now, Maya added, her voice gentle but firm. Just take it one step at a time. But that starts with seeing a doctor. You need to know where you stand. Jasmine swallowed hard, trying to push past the tightness in her chest. I guess you're right. I don't even know what's happening to me, and I can't keep ignoring it. Maya smiled at her hand resting briefly on Jasmine's arm. You're not alone in this, Jasmine. We'll figure it out together. The idea of seeing a doctor was both terrifying and necessary. Jasmine felt a mix of dread and reluctant acceptance. She knew she needed to face this head-on, even if it meant confronting the reality of what was happening to her body. The next morning, after a restless night, Jasmine reluctantly agreed to go with Maya to a local clinic. Maya had made an appointment for her, and she insisted on coming along to offer support. Jasmine could barely keep her thoughts straight as she sat in the waiting room, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the small purse on her lap. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, and the dull hum of fluorescent lights made her feel even more detached from reality. This was it. She was here, about to find out the truth about what was happening to her. A nurse called her name, and Jasmine stood up, feeling her heart pound in her chest. Maya gave her a reassuring smile as she followed behind. The exam room was small and sterile, the kind of room that made everything feel so clinical, so removed from the emotions swirling inside her. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with short brown hair and warm eyes, greeted them with a professional yet kind demeanor. "Hi, Jasmine. I'm Dr. Reynolds," she said, her voice calm and soothing. "How are you feeling today?" Jasmine swallowed, trying to find her words. "I'm okay, I guess," she said quietly, though she felt far from okay. I just need to know what's going on. I don't know what to expect." Dr. Reynolds nodded understandingly, setting down her clipboard. "I understand. Let's start by taking a look at your health and making sure everything is progressing as it should." The next few moments were a blur. Jasmine felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she never had before. She wanted to shrink into herself, to disappear from the cold, clinical world around her. But Maya's presence beside her was a comfort. She could feel her friend's hand resting lightly on her shoulder, as if telling her that she was there, that she wasn't alone in this. When the doctor finally finished her examination, she sat back and looked at Jasmine with a gentle expression. "Everything seems to be progressing normally, Jasmine," she said. "But we need to talk about your options moving forward. Have you thought about what you want to do?" Jasmine's heart skipped a beat at the question. She had thought about it, of course, but no decision felt right. She couldn't picture herself as a mother, not at her age, not with her circumstances. But the thought of abortion filled her with guilt, and the thought of adoption, though more comforting, made her heart ache at the idea of giving up a child that had grown inside her. "I don't know what I want," Jasmine admitted, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can do this." Dr. Reynolds studied her for a long moment before speaking softly. "You don't have to make any decisions right now, Jasmine. But it's important to give yourself the time and space to think about it. And if you want to talk more about your options, I'm here to help." Jasmine nodded, trying to hold herself together. The doctor left the room to give them some privacy, and Maya immediately turned to her, her expression filled with empathy. "I know this isn't easy," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you're doing the right thing. You're taking control of your situation, even if it feels impossible right now. You'll get through this. You will." Jasmine felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. "I don't know how. I'm so scared, Maya. I feel like I'm drowning." Maya wrapped her arms around her, holding her tightly, and Jasmine clung to her as if her life depended on it. The truth was, she was terrified. Terrified of making the wrong choice, of facing the reality of her pregnancy, of the uncertain future that awaited her. For the first time in weeks, Jasmine let herself break down completely, her sobs filling the sterile room. She couldn't do this alone. She needed someone to help her navigate this fear, this impossible decision. And though Maya couldn't make the decision for her, she was here, standing by her side. And for that, Jasmine was grateful. The weight of the doctor's words lingered in Jasmine's mind long after she left the clinic. Maya had insisted on staying with her through the entire appointment, offering comforting words and gestures. But Jasmine couldn't shake the anxiety gnawing at her. The doctor's calm and compassionate advice only made her feel more confused. It was as if each option, each potential path she could take, carried its own burden. The future she imagined for herself seemed like a distant dream now, and the reality she faced felt like a cruel twist of fate. That night, Jasmine lay in bed, her hands resting lightly on her still flat stomach. The darkness of the room wrapped around her, the silence making the weight of her thoughts even more unbearable. She wanted to sleep, to shut everything out, but her mind wouldn't let her. Her body was changing, and with each passing day, it felt less like her own. She had already missed several periods, and her breasts were sore and sensitive, a constant reminder that she was no longer just a teenager. She was pregnant, and that truth, in all its rawness, was suffocating her. But what could she do about it? Jasmine rolled onto her side, pulling the thin blanket tightly around her. She closed her eyes, trying to quiet the storm of emotions inside her. The sound of footsteps outside her room caught her attention, and a soft knock on her door made her heart race. "Maya?" Jasmine asked, her voice hoarse from the tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed earlier. "Yeah, it's me." Maya's voice came through, calm and steady. "Can I come in?" Jasmine nodded, wiping her eyes before sitting up. The door creaked open, and Maya stepped inside, her expression soft but knowing. She held a cup of tea in her hand, steam rising from the top. "I brought you some tea," Maya said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I know it's been a tough day." Jasmine managed a faint smile, taking the cup from Maya's outstretched hand. She didn't say anything for a long moment, just letting the warmth of the tea comfort her. It was a small gesture, but in this moment, it felt like everything. "I don't know what to do," Jasmine said finally, her voice cracking as she looked down at the cup in her hands. "I feel like I'm drowning in all of this." Maya nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "I can't tell you what to do, Jasmine, but I can tell you that whatever you decide, you don't have to go through it alone. We're all here for you." Jasmine took a shaky breath, the weight of her emotions breaking through as the tears finally began to fall. She wasn't ready to make a decision, but she couldn't avoid it forever. The reality of her situation was pressing down on her, and the choices that seemed so distant only a few weeks ago were now right in front of her, staring her in the face. "I'm scared," Jasmine whispered, her voice small. "What if I'm not ready? What if I can't be a good mom?" "You don't have to have all the answers now," Maya said, her voice firm but gentle. "You're going to be scared. It's normal, but that doesn't mean you won't be able to do this. And if you don't feel ready, that's okay too. You don't have to make any decisions tonight." Jasmine shook her head. "But I can't keep avoiding it, Maya. I have to choose. I have to figure out what's next. I can't just keep living in this limbo." Maya placed a hand on Jasmine's arm, her touch grounding her. "I know. And whatever you choose, you'll have people here who will support you. Whether that means keeping the baby or not, we've got your back." For the first time in weeks, Jasmine allowed herself to really feel the support that surrounded her. She didn't feel completely alone. She didn't feel abandoned. But that didn't make her decision any easier. After a long silence, Jasmine wiped her eyes and looked up at Maya, her voice trembling but steady. "I don't know if I can keep the baby. I don't know if I'm ready to be a mom." Maya nodded, her gaze unwavering. "That's okay. It's okay to feel unsure. It's okay to take time to think about what you want. You don't have to do it all at once." Jasmine took a deep breath, her chest aching with the weight of her indecision. She had been trying so hard to find the right answer, the one that would make everything fall into place. But there was no right answer, no perfect solution, only choices. Over the next few days, Jasmine wrestled with the decision, weighing her options, but none of them felt entirely right. She could keep the baby, but what kind of future could she offer? She could give the baby up for adoption, but the thought of carrying a child for 9 months and then handing it over to someone else filled her with dread. And then there was the option of abortion, the one she couldn't bring herself to talk about even though it lingered in the back of her mind. Jasmine tried to talk to her mother a few times, but each attempt ended in frustration. Her mom, despite everything that had happened, didn't understand. She told Jasmine that she needed to fix this, that she couldn't ruin her life by making mistakes. The words stung, but Jasmine no longer sought her approval. Not for this. One afternoon, while sitting on the couch with Maya and Sarah, Jasmine received a call from the clinic where she had seen the doctor. She stared at her phone, hesitant. It was the last thing she wanted to deal with, but she couldn't avoid it forever. With a sigh, she answered, "Hello." "Hi, Jasmine." The nurse's voice was cheerful but professional. "We just wanted to remind you about your follow-up appointment. It's tomorrow at 2 p.m. Jasmine's stomach twisted at the reminder. "Right. Thanks. We'll see you then." The call ended, and Jasmine was left staring at the phone, her mind racing. Another appointment. Another moment where she would have to face the reality of her situation. And the choices would only get harder. "Everything okay?" Maya asked, noticing the look on Jasmine's face. Jasmine swallowed hard, looking up at her. I don't know what to do." Maya took a deep breath, placing a hand on Jasmine's. "You don't have to decide everything in one day. You have time. You have options. Just take it step by step. And when you're ready, you'll know what to do." Jasmine nodded, grateful for the reassurance. The pressure to make a decision felt unbearable, but Maya's words gave her something to hold on to. She didn't have to figure it all out right now. There was time. And then, she remembered something her mother had said back when she was just a child, before the world had gotten complicated. "You never have to be perfect, Jasmine. Just try your best. That's enough." Maybe, just maybe, trying her best was all she could do. Jasmine sat in the sterile examination room, her hands trembling in her lap. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the air, a constant reminder that everything in this moment was clinical, detached, yet profoundly personal. Her mind was spinning, an endless loop of doubt and fear. Every part of her body ached with the weight of the decisions before her, but her heart felt paralyzed, unable to take the step it needed to. Her world, once clear and bright, now seemed obscured by a heavy fog of uncertainty. Dr. Reynolds had left the room after offering her a moment to think, but the silence felt suffocating. Jasmine knew there was no way out. Every option was fraught with consequences. Every path she considered had its own price, a price that she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. Her thoughts were a chaotic whirlwind. She tried to imagine the future. What would life be like with a child? Would she be able to provide for it? She was only a teenager, still growing, still finding her way in the world. How could she possibly be expected to become a mother when she still felt like a child herself? She could barely take care of herself, let alone a tiny, helpless being. Yet, the thought of not keeping the baby filled her with a crushing sense of guilt. The idea of choosing abortion or adoption made her feel like she was betraying something that was growing inside of her, something that deserved love and a chance at life. She had always believed that a mother should protect and nurture her child, no matter the cost. And yet here she was wondering if she was capable of doing either. Jasmine leaned back against the cold, sterile wall, her eyes unfocused as her mind raced. She thought about the life she had imagined for herself before everything changed. The dream of finishing school, going to college, maybe traveling, finding herself, and then someday when she was ready, having a family. But now, the future she had once seen was slipping through her fingers, replaced by a daunting reality. The path she had imagined was no longer accessible. Every step forward seemed tangled in doubt. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her spiraling thoughts. It was a text from Maya. "How are you doing?" Jasmine stared at the screen for a long time. She wanted to tell Maya the truth, to pour out everything that was weighing on her. But what could she say? How could she explain the suffocating pressure, the guilt, and the deep uncertainty that felt like it was suffocating her? She took a deep breath and typed back, "I don't know. I'm so scared. I don't know if I can do this." The response came quickly. "You don't have to do it alone. I'm here with you no matter what. Take your time. We'll figure it out together." Jasmine let out a shaky breath, wiping away the tear that had slipped down her cheek. Maya's words were a lifeline, but the truth was, Jasmine didn't feel like she could figure this out. She wasn't even sure she knew who she was anymore. She had spent so much time trying to please others, trying to fit into the mold that was expected of her. But now, the choices she had to make didn't fit into any mold. They were her choices, and that made them terrifying. She tried to imagine what it would be like if she kept the baby. What would her life look like? Could she raise it alone? Could she be a good mother without the support of her family, without the security of a stable life? She thought about her mom and the way she had treated her, the words that had been thrown at her, the rejection that stung every time she thought about it. Could she trust herself to be a better mother than her mom had been to her? But then, there was the life inside of her, the tiny heartbeat she had heard just a few weeks ago. A life that had no say in its future, a life that depended entirely on her. How could she make that choice? How could she turn her back on something so pure, so innocent? The weight of the decision was unbearable. Jasmine felt as though the room was closing in on her, the walls pressing in from all sides. The silence was deafening, and yet it was filled with 1,000 voices. Her own voice, the voice of her mother, the voices of people she had never even met. They all seemed to demand something from her, something that she wasn't sure she could give. Jasmine closed her eyes, letting the tears flow freely now. She had to make a decision. The time was coming, and she couldn't keep putting it off. But how could she decide something so monumental when every option felt like a sacrifice? No matter what she chose, there would be consequences. And the consequences felt too big to bear. The door opened then, and Maya stepped inside, her face soft with concern. "Jazz," she said, her voice gentle. "I've been thinking. You don't have to have all the answers right now. But you don't have to make this decision alone." Jasmine didn't look up. She couldn't. She felt broken, lost in the weight of it all. "I don't know if I'm strong enough, Maya. I don't know if I can do this." Maya sat beside her, not saying anything at first, just letting the silence settle between them. Jasmine could feel her friend's warmth beside her, but it only made the coldness in her chest more pronounced. "I know it's hard," Maya said finally, "but you don't have to be perfect. You just have to choose what's right for you. And we'll support you no matter what. We're all here." Jasmine squeezed her eyes shut, the pressure building in her chest. "But I don't know if I can make the right choice. I'm so scared that I'll regret it, no matter what I choose. That I'll mess everything up. I don't even know if I can be a good mom. I don't know if I can handle this responsibility." "You don't have to have everything figured out right now," Maya reassured her. "Nobody has all the answers. You just have to trust yourself, and trust that we'll be here to help you. This is your decision, Jazz. And no matter what, it's okay to feel scared. It's okay to feel unsure. But that doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human." Jasmine finally lifted her gaze to meet Maya's eyes. They were filled with compassion, understanding, and something deeper. An unwavering belief in Jasmine's strength, even when Jasmine couldn't see it herself. "I don't know what to do," Jasmine whispered, her voice breaking. "But I don't want to lose this baby. I don't want to give up on something that's so precious. But I also don't want to be a failure." Maya's hand reached out, gently squeezing Jasmine's. "Whatever you decide, you won't be a failure. You won't be alone. You don't have to be perfect. You just need to make the choice that feels right for you. And I'll be with you every step of the way." Jasmine let out a breath, her body trembling with emotion. The weight of the decision didn't disappear, but for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find her way through it. Not perfectly, but with the support of the people who loved her. But deep inside, the fear was still there. And Jasmine knew that no matter what choice she made, it would come with a price. The price of choosing one path meant turning away from another. And that was a burden that she would have to carry for the rest of her life. Days passed in a blur for Jasmine. Time felt like it was running out. But no matter how hard she tried, no clear answer emerged. She couldn't escape the heaviness in her chest, the gnawing feeling that every decision she made would change everything. Each option seemed to come with its own set of consequences, painful, irreversible consequences that she would have to carry with her for the rest of her life. Dr. Reynolds had left the room after offering her a moment to think, but the silence felt suffocating. Jasmine knew there was no way out. Every option was fraught with consequences. Every path she considered had its own price, a price that she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. Her thoughts were a chaotic whirlwind. She tried to imagine the future. What would life be like with a child? Would she be able to provide for it? She was only a teenager, still growing, still finding her way in the world. How could she possibly be expected to become a mother when she still felt like a child herself? She could barely take care of herself, let alone a tiny, helpless being. Yet, the thought of not keeping the baby filled her with a crushing sense of guilt. The idea of choosing abortion or adoption made her feel like she was betraying something that was growing inside of her, something that deserved love and a chance at life. She had always believed that a mother should protect and nurture her child, no matter the cost. And yet here she was wondering if she was capable of doing either. Jasmine leaned back against the cold, sterile wall, her eyes unfocused as her mind raced. She thought about the life she had imagined for herself before everything changed. The dream of finishing school, going to college, maybe traveling, finding herself, and then someday when she was ready, having a family. But now, the future she had once seen was slipping through her fingers, replaced by a daunting reality. The path she had imagined was no longer accessible. Every step forward seemed tangled in doubt. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her spiraling thoughts. It was a text from Maya. "How are you doing?" Jasmine stared at the screen for a long time. She wanted to tell Maya the truth, to pour out everything that was weighing on her. But what could she say? How could she explain the suffocating pressure, the guilt, and the deep uncertainty that felt like it was suffocating her? She took a deep breath and typed back, "I don't know. I'm so scared. I don't know if I can do this." The response came quickly. "You don't have to do it alone. I'm here with you no matter what. Take your time. We'll figure it out together." Jasmine let out a shaky breath, wiping away the tear that had slipped down her cheek. Maya's words were a lifeline, but the truth was, Jasmine didn't feel like she could figure this out. She wasn't even sure she knew who she was anymore. She had spent so much time trying to please others, trying to fit into the mold that was expected of her. But now, the choices she had to make didn't fit into any mold. They were her choices, and that made them terrifying. She tried to imagine what it would be like if she kept the baby. What would her life look like? Could she raise it alone? Could she be a good mother without the support of her family? Without the security of a stable life? She thought about her mom and the way she had treated her, the words that had been thrown at her, the rejection that stung every time she thought about it. Could she trust herself to be a better mother than her mom had been to her? But then, there was the life inside of her. The tiny heartbeat she had heard just a few weeks ago. A life that had no say in its future. A life that depended entirely on her. How could she make that choice? How could she turn her back on something so pure, so innocent? The weight of the decision was unbearable. Jasmine felt as though the room was closing in on her, the walls pressing in from all sides. The silence was deafening, and yet it was filled with 1,000 voices. Her own voice, the voice of her mother, the voices of people she had never even met. They all seemed to demand something from her, something that she wasn't sure she could give. Jasmine closed her eyes, letting the tears flow freely now. She had to make a decision. The time was coming, and she couldn't keep putting it off. But how could she decide something so monumental when every option felt like a sacrifice? No matter what she chose, there would be consequences. And the consequences felt too big to bear. The door opened then, and Maya stepped inside, her face soft with concern. "Jazz," she said, her voice gentle. "I've been thinking. You don't have to have all the answers right now. But you don't have to make this decision alone." Jasmine didn't look up. She couldn't. She felt broken, lost in the weight of it all. "I don't know if I'm strong enough, Maya. I don't know if I can do this." Maya sat beside her, not saying anything at first, just letting the silence settle between them. Jasmine could feel her friend's warmth beside her, but it only made the coldness in her chest more pronounced. "I know it's hard," Maya said finally, "but you don't have to be perfect. You just have to choose what's right for you. And we'll support you no matter what. We're all here." Jasmine squeezed her eyes shut, the pressure building in her chest. "But I don't know if I can make the right choice. I'm so scared that I'll regret it, no matter what I choose. That I'll mess everything up. I don't even know if I can be a good mom. I don't know if I can handle this responsibility." "You don't have to have everything figured out right now," Maya reassured her. "Nobody has all the answers. You just have to trust yourself, and trust that we'll be here to help you. This is your decision, Jazz. And no matter what, it's okay to feel scared. It's okay to feel unsure. But that doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human." Jasmine finally lifted her gaze to meet Maya's eyes. They were filled with compassion, understanding, and something deeper. An unwavering belief in Jasmine's strength, even when Jasmine couldn't see it herself. "I don't know what to do," Jasmine whispered, her voice breaking. "But I don't want to lose this baby. I don't want to give up on something that's so precious. But I also don't want to be a failure." Maya's hand reached out, gently squeezing Jasmine's. "Whatever you decide, you won't be a failure. You won't be alone. You don't have to be perfect. You just need to make the choice that feels right for you. And I'll be with you every step of the way." Jasmine let out a breath, her body trembling with emotion. The weight of the decision didn't disappear, but for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find her way through it. Not perfectly, but with the support of the people who loved her. But deep inside, the fear was still there. And Jasmine knew that no matter what choice she made, it would come with a price. The price of choosing one path meant turning away from another. And that was a burden that she would have to carry for the rest of her life. Days passed in a blur for Jasmine. Time felt like it was running out. But no matter how hard she tried, no clear answer emerged. She couldn't escape the heaviness in her chest, the gnawing feeling that every decision she made would change everything. Each option seemed to come with its own set of consequences, painful, irreversible consequences that she would have to carry with her for the rest of her life. Maya had been a constant support, as had Sarah, both offering their encouragement and presence without pressuring her. Still, Jasmine felt more isolated than ever. No one could make this decision for her. It was hers alone, and that fact seemed to suffocate her more with each passing day. The doctor's office had given her some time to think, but every time she tried to envision her future, either with the baby or without it, she was met with a wall of uncertainty. Her dreams of going to college, traveling, becoming something beyond the confines of her small town, now felt distant. The reality of motherhood loomed before her like a mountain, and she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to climb it. There was also the fear of her family. Her mother's rejection still stung, and Jasmine couldn't bear the thought of facing her again. Her father was out of the picture, and she hadn't spoken to him in years. There was no one to help her, no safety net. And yet, there was something deep inside her that couldn't shake the idea of turning away from the child growing inside of her. That tiny, helpless being deserved a chance at life, didn't it? Could she really be the one to deny it that chance? The decision was tearing her apart. Jasmine spent that night alone in her room, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The silence of the apartment was oppressive, and she couldn't seem to quiet her thoughts. Her phone buzzed, breaking through the noise in her head. It was a text from her mother. "I know you're struggling. We need to talk. Come home." Jasmine froze. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. It had been weeks since they'd spoken. The last time they had, her mother had kicked her out, telling her that she wasn't welcome in the house anymore. Now, out of nowhere, she was asking Jasmine to return. Jasmine wasn't sure if she was ready to face her mother again. Would it just be more of the same? More rejection? Still, there was a part of Jasmine that couldn't ignore the possibility of healing, of perhaps finding the support she so desperately needed. She wasn't sure if her mother could ever accept her decision, whether she kept the baby or not. But she couldn't deny that the thought of going back to that house, even temporarily, stirred something in her. The next morning, Jasmine stood at the edge of her mother's front porch. She could feel her heart thundering in her chest, each beat a reminder of everything that had brought her to this moment. Could she face her mother after everything that had happened? Could she forgive the woman who had once pushed her away? She took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door creaked open, and there stood her mother, a mix of apprehension and something else, maybe regret, on her face. Her eyes softened when she saw Jasmine standing there, her hands wringing nervously in front of her. "Jasmine," her mother said, her voice hesitant. "Come inside." Jasmine stepped into the house, her heart racing. She had expected the house to feel foreign, cold, but surprisingly, it felt like a place she could almost remember. The old familiar smells, the scent of baking bread, the faint smell of lavender, washed over her, and for a moment, she let herself feel like a little girl again. But that feeling quickly passed, replaced by the reality of what had happened between them. Her mother led her to the kitchen, where the table was set for breakfast. Jasmine sat down, avoiding her mother's gaze as she fiddled with the hem of her shirt. "You look like you've been through hell," her mother said quietly, her tone softened by something Jasmine couldn't quite place. "I know I've been hard on you. But, Jasmine, I want to make things right. I want to help." Jasmine's chest tightened. She could feel the weight of her mother's words, but also the heavy burden of all the unspoken things between them. The years of distance, the hurt, the betrayal. Could she really accept her mother's help after everything? Could she trust that she wouldn't turn on her again? "I don't know if I can trust you, Mom," Jasmine said, her voice trembling. "You kicked me out. You told me I was a burden. And now you want to help." Her mother's face fell, a flicker of pain flashing in her eyes. "I was wrong. I've been wrong about so many things. And I can't undo the past, but I can try to be there for you now. You don't have to go through this alone. I'm sorry for what I said. I'm sorry for making you feel like you had no choice but to leave." Jasmine swallowed hard, her throat thick with emotion. Her mother's apology, so simple and yet so rare, sent a tidal wave of conflicting feelings crashing through her. On one hand, she wanted to believe her mother. She wanted to let the old wounds heal, to accept the help that was being offered. But there was a part of her, a deep part that had learned not to trust, that couldn't forget the years of rejection. "You don't have to make a decision today, Jasmine," her mother continued, her voice gentler now. "You have time. But I want you to know that whatever you choose, you're not alone. I'll support you, and I'll help you take care of the baby, if that's what you decide." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. Her mother's words were what she had longed to hear. But now the decision seemed more complicated than ever. What if it wasn't just about choosing between the baby and her future? What if it was about the broken bond between them? Could she really trust her mother again? I don't know what to do," Jasmine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't even know if I can do it." Her mother reached across the table and gently placed her hand over Jasmine's. "You're stronger than you think, Jasmine. And no matter what happens, you'll find a way through this. You have a family who loves you, and we'll figure this out together." Jasmine looked down at her mother's hand on hers, the warmth of it a stark contrast to the cold fear that gripped her heart. She wasn't sure if she believed her, if she was truly ready to forgive. But for the first time in weeks, she felt the tiniest flicker of hope. But as she sat there, her mind still whirring with thoughts of the future, Jasmine knew that her choice would not just shape her future. It would reshape everything she thought she knew about herself. The path ahead was filled with uncertainty, and no matter what choice she made, there would be no going back. Jasmine didn't know what to do yet, but for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that, maybe, just maybe, she could find the strength to make it through. Days passed in a haze. Jasmine felt like she was living in a world that no longer made sense. Her mother's return to her life was both a blessing and a burden. The words of comfort she had longed to hear now felt like chains, anchoring her to a past she couldn't escape. The tension between hope and fear tugged at her heart, and despite the unconditional support her mother offered, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that the world was closing in on her. The baby inside of her grew, and so did the weight of the decision. Every night, the quiet of her room pressed in on her, the silence broken only by the rhythmic beating of her own heart and the subtle flutter inside her belly. It was hard to ignore it, impossible really. That tiny heartbeat, so fragile, yet so undeniable, served as a constant reminder of the life she carried. A life that, no matter how much she tried to distance herself from the responsibility, was undeniably hers. Jasmine spent hours thinking about her options. Adoption, though it seemed like a selfless choice, brought an ache to her chest. Would she be able to let go of the child she had carried for so long? Could she live with herself if she handed her baby over to strangers? Even for a better life? The thought gnawed at her, leaving her feeling empty and disconnected. And then there was keeping the baby. The idea filled her with terror. Could she raise a child, all on her own? Could she provide it with the love and security it needed? Would she be able to be the mother the child deserved, when all she could see was her own failure in the mirror? But no matter how much she wrestled with herself, one truth remained. She couldn't go back to the life she once envisioned. Her dreams of college, of traveling, of being something more than the small-town girl who had made so many mistakes, those dreams felt distant, out of reach. Even if she kept the baby, that life was gone. One evening, as the sun set behind the horizon, Jasmine stood at the edge of the park, her hands pressed against the chain-link fence. She watched the world go by, the people living their ordinary lives, unaware of the war raging inside her. She felt like an outsider, as though she no longer belonged in the world she once knew. Behind her, a familiar voice broke the silence. "Jazz, you okay?" Maya's voice was soft, concerned. Jasmine didn't turn around. She couldn't. The walls she had built up over the last few weeks felt insurmountable. She was tired of pretending, tired of carrying the weight of a decision that no one could help her make. She could feel Maya standing behind her, waiting, but Jasmine couldn't bring herself to face her friend. "I don't know if I can do this," Jasmine whispered, her voice cracking. Maya stepped closer, standing by her side, though she didn't say anything at first. She knew the gravity of what Jasmine was facing. There were no words that could fix this, no perfect thing to say that would ease the pain. "Jazz," Maya said softly, her voice steady. "You don't have to do it alone. I'm here. We're all here." Jasmine nodded, but her heart was heavy with a pain she couldn't describe. She wanted to believe that everything would be okay, that this was just a moment of fear, but deep down, she knew that this wasn't a moment, it was a lifetime. A lifetime she wasn't sure she was ready for. The sound of a car pulling up broke the moment. Jasmine turned and saw her mother's car in the parking lot. Her heart sank. The woman who had rejected her so many weeks ago now stood, waiting, hoping for a reconciliation she wasn't sure she could give. Her mother waved at her, a small, hopeful gesture. Jasmine forced a smile, though the weight of it made her feel more like a stranger to her own skin. "I'll go talk to her," Maya said, her voice gentle. "You don't have to make a decision right now, Jazz, but we can figure this out together." Jasmine didn't respond as Maya walked toward the car. She stood there, frozen in place, staring at the horizon as the world continued to spin. A few minutes later, Maya returned. "She wants to talk to you," she said, her tone a little more somber than before. Jasmine nodded, feeling the numbness return. She walked slowly toward the car, her feet dragging as though they were weighted with cement. Each step felt heavier than the last, and her stomach churned with an unease she couldn't shake. Her mother met her halfway, her face a mixture of hope and hesitation. "Jazz, we need to talk about your decision," she said, her voice soft. "You don't have to do this alone. I know I haven't been perfect, but I'll be here for you, no matter what you choose." Jasmine stared at her mother for a long moment. The woman who had pushed her away, the woman who had caused her so much pain, was now offering support. Jasmine wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe that they could start over, that they could rebuild their relationship. But there was a voice inside of her, a voice that told her that this moment wasn't just about motherhood. It was about everything that had led to this point. The years of rejection, the loneliness, the feeling of not being good enough. Could she really go back to the woman who had made her feel like a mistake? "I'm sorry, Mom," Jasmine said, her voice trembling. "I don't think I can do this. I can't go back. I'm so scared, but I can't change what's happened." Her mother's face faltered, and the silence between them was deafening. Jasmine's words hung in the air, crushing them both. "You don't have to be perfect, Jazz," her mother said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You don't have to fix everything. I'll be here for you, but I can't make this decision for you." Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling the tears well up in her eyes. She couldn't do it. She couldn't carry the weight of all the expectations. She couldn't live up to the dreams of others. And the thought of being a mother, of trying to give her baby the life it deserved while fighting her own demons, felt too heavy. "I'm sorry," Jasmine whispered again, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I don't think I can do this." Her mother reached out to her, but Jasmine stepped back, shaking her head. "I don't know how to be strong, Mom. I don't know if I'll ever be strong enough." As she turned and walked away, the weight of her decision crushed her. She couldn't go back. She couldn't move forward. The pain of that realization was more than she could bear. And as she walked into the night, the tears that fell from her eyes felt like the closing of a door she could never reopen. The next day, the phone rang, a number she hadn't expected. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked it up. "Jasmine, it's the hospital. We need you to come in." Her blood ran cold. There was no turning back now. Jasmine's choice was made, though it wasn't made in the way anyone could have expected. In the early hours of the morning, a complication had occurred, one that she had never anticipated, one that no one could have predicted. Her body, too young to bear such a burden, had faltered in the most heartbreaking way. The doctors called it a miscarriage, a devastating loss that would have shattered anyone's heart. But Jasmine, despite the raw emotion that came with it, couldn't find herself to grieve in the way she expected. Instead, she felt a haunting emptiness, a void where there had once been hope and where there would never be a chance to make things right. Her mother was by her side, but it was too late. The tears that Jasmine had shed before felt almost insignificant now. She had lost more than just a baby. She had lost her chance at redemption, her chance at closure. The weight of her decision had broken her in ways she could never have foreseen. And as the days stretched on, Jasmine realized that the tragedy wasn't just in the loss of a child. It was in the realization that, sometimes, the most tragic part of a decision is living with the weight of its consequences, knowing that there are no second chances. The loss would forever haunt her, a shadow she could never outrun.